At 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
A very good morning to you, 9:30 here on GB News. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you updated today. The UK and France have signed a historic agreement to tackle the migrant crisis. British staff will be working in French border control rooms for the first time, and the number of officers patrolling beaches will be boosted by 40%. Well, the new deal's designed to stop people crossing the Channel illegally. Over 40,000 asylum seekers have made the journey so far this year. Other measures include investment in CCTV and dog detection teams, as well as plans to better equip officers with drones and night vision devices. The Prime Minister says Thursday's autumn budget will put the country's public finances on a sustainable trajectory. Rishi Sunak is working to reassure and convince the markets that the government has a sound plan to fix the economy. The Chancellor has warned that everyone will need to pay a bit more tax and said sacrifices are needed to balance the books. The Foreign Secretary James Cleverly told GB News the upcoming autumn budget would protect the most vulnerable.
We will always support the people who are struggling, but we also have to make sure that we balance the books. And the decisions that the Prime Minister and Chancellor have already taken has increased confidence in the markets. It has reduced the cost of borrowing from the high point that we saw earlier on in the autumn. These things are positive steps, but we do still have tough decisions to make and real hard work to do.
The King turns 74 today, his first birthday as monarch. Gun salutes will be fired across London in honour of his birthday for the first time. The Household Cavalry Band will play Happy Birthday during the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. You're up to date on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you. My name's Tom Harwood and this is The Briefing here on GB News. Now, let's get straight into it. Today, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is expected to be preparing to announce his much-anticipated autumn budget, which, of course, is taking place on Thursday. Now, I'm delighted to be joined, first of all, today by Mark Littlewood, the Director General of the Institute for Economic Affairs, in terms of discussing what exactly will be involved in this autumn statement. One might describe it as a budget, certainly a bit more of a maxi budget than the mini budget that we saw, of course, only a few months ago. And Mark, first of all this morning, we're of course being told by the Chancellor that everyone can expect taxes to go up and indeed spending to go down. Just how painful would this be?
Well, Tom, we pretty much, I think, know the numbers now, if the leaks are to be believed, that there's going to be about £35 billion worth of spending cuts. That's not an insignificant amount of money, but it's not a very big part of the government budget. They should be able to find that broadly through efficiency savings. In terms of the tax rises, what we suspect, perhaps the Chancellor will surprise us on Thursday, is that the income tax thresholds will be changed or frozen. So that means as your salary goes up, if you're on a low salary, let's say below 12,000, but you get a £1,000 pay rise, you may now find you're paying income tax. If you're a rather higher earner, you may find that you're dragged into the 40p rate of income tax. And if you're a very high earner, earning well over £100,000 a year, we might well find that the 45p rate of tax, the top rate of tax, kicks in at maybe 125,000 rather than 150,000. So pretty much for all earners, you can expect that more income tax will be coming out of your paycheck after Jeremy Hunt's spoken on Thursday than before. The one thing I will give them a bit of praise for compared to the last government is I think they've correctly analysed that we need to show some fiscal constraint. If there was a criticism of the Truss Kwarteng government, it was that they seemed to think they could spend money on tax cuts and energy bailouts forevermore. The Sunak-Hunt administration realises there has to be some effort to balance the books. But I don't think that anything that's going to change on Thursday, and if I'm right about that speculation, is actually going to do what you've just mentioned in your bulletin, Tom, to put Britain on a sustainable fiscal trajectory. That's the aim. Well, we're going to have to find a lot more cuts to achieve that, I'm afraid. This so-called 40 or 50 billion pound black hole they faced this week is just the start of that. In truth, Britain is trillions of pounds in debt.
Of course, the Liz Truss diagnosis of the problem in terms of why there is this black hole in the first place, in terms of why there isn't enough money to spend on the things that we would like to be spent on, or indeed to lower taxes, is because of the problem of growth, that we haven't had as high growth as we would want for the last few decades. And I wonder, does this new government, in your view, have the same diagnosis of the problem? Do they get the issue here? Because, of course, we talk about painful tax rises and spending cuts. Those wouldn't be necessary were the growth rate higher.
Yeah, I think that's right, Tom. I mean, my great disappointment with the Liz Truss administration imploding was I thought that the medical diagnosis was bang on right, if you like. I mean, you might heavily criticise the surgery that followed that diagnosis, but at least they got the diagnosis right, that essentially our economy has been more or less flatlining. I mean, growing at the rate of maybe 1% or so a year since the financial crash. And historically, our growth rates have been nearer 2.5%. Now, that difference between 1% and 2.5%, well, that might not sound like a big difference to your viewers, Tom. But when you compound that over time, when it's 2.5%, every year for a decade or every year for a generation, as opposed to 1% every year for a decade or every year for a generation, the impact that makes on our personal finances and the government's ability to collect revenue to pay for public services is truly enormous. And unfortunately, this government hasn't said anything about Liz Truss's much prized supply side reforms. These are, what ways can we deregulate the economy or free up business? She was going to roll out a whole load of investment zones where tighter regulations wouldn't apply. She, of course, it was a mess in Parliament at the time when the vote took place, wanted to allow fracking for shale gas to help our energy industry. Almost the first action of the new Prime Minister was to make it very clear fracking was going to be banned again. So I haven't really heard much from the new administration, from the Sunak-Hunt administration, about are they going to do anything at all to liberate business. At the moment, it seems to be going back to this slight sort of bean counting, some of which is valuable. You shouldn't be spending a lot more than you're bringing in, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of imagination. I mean, Liz Truss basically took on the Treasury orthodoxy, and the Treasury orthodoxy won.
It is extraordinary that we are facing a global economic slowdown, a third of the global economy now in recession, mainly due to an energy crisis. And two of the first things this new government does is undo liberalisations in terms of re-banning onshore wind and shale gas extraction, banning two ways that the British economy could generate more electricity. It's the most extraordinary priority list, and I wonder if this is a pretty bad sign of things to come.
Yeah, I'm worried about it, Tom, because I think if you, when we look through the sort of tea leaves and the record of the very short-lived Truss administration, it at least did have a bit of an eye on the long term. They might have tried to do too much in their 44 days in office, but the sort of aim was, let's put in place now things that will improve circumstances, not just tomorrow or next week or next month. Policy takes time to trickle through with its impact, but let's put in place now things that might have an impact in maybe a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. I mean, clearly, if we were to, liberalise our planning laws to allow much more house building, or as you've just mentioned, Tom, allow fracking for shale gas. We wouldn't expect that to come on stream tomorrow or next week. It's not an immediate fix. It would take some years for us to actually realise the benefits of that in any meaningful way. But I worry now that we've gone back to, if you like, the extreme short term, that all that matters is that on Thursday the money markets respond relatively well to Jeremy Hunt's autumn budget, and that does matter. I'm not diminishing that, but we seem now to have got ourselves to a position in government when sort of all that matters is the next 24 hours. The next 24 hours always matter, but we should have half an eye on the next 24 months. And I don't think there's any real long-term vision or long-term planning for how things might be a bit better for the UK economy in, say, 2024 compared to 2022. So when we do get to 2024, I'm expecting all of these problems to emerge again. And I'll be sitting here talking to you, Tom, in a couple of years' time about, oh, I'm terribly sorry, we're going to have to put taxes up again to fix a fiscal hole. And unless you actually take a longer-term view about economic growth, we're going to be in this vicious spiral of higher taxes, heavy regulation, desperately trying to get spending under control because there's been no plan to actually get our growth rates back to the sort of 2 or 3% that we were used to. So we need, I know it might be a desperate plea, but we need politicians of all stripes to think rather more long-term about the economy in the next 2, 5, 10 years, rather than just how they survive the next 2 days or 2 weeks.
Potentially, this is the story of the last 30 years of British governance, that you've got politicians with increasingly short political lifespans, the speed of government rolling over ever faster, and a lack of any sort of thinking about strategic long-term investment. It's a depressing situation, but let's hope that it will be lighter, perhaps, down the road. Mark, thank you for joining us and that depressing analysis of where we are as a country and an economy. Well, moving on, the Prime Minister has now landed in Indonesia to attend the G20 summit today, where he is expected to make his mark on the international stage. Members of the G20 comprise 80% of the global economy and 2/3 of the global population. While he's there, he will talk of, on top of the main business of the summit, he's going to have bilateral meetings, 7 separate bilateral meetings with heads of government of the United States, Australia, Canada, India, Indonesia, Japan and Saudi Arabia. The Prime Minister is expected to push for coordinated global action to bring down the cost of living and indeed end the war in Ukraine, which the government argues is devastating the global economy. But also intriguingly, in the last half an hour, the Associated Press is reporting that one controversial attendee, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, has been rushed to hospital. We'll keep across this developing story this morning, as the summit had been expected to be the first encounter between a British Prime Minister and a Russian government representative since Putin's invasion of Ukraine at the start of the year. Well, meanwhile, back at home, we're all waiting for Thursday's autumn budget, of course. The pitch is being rolled and we're being told to expect very few points of light. Of course, as we were discussing, the Chancellor said, we will all pay more taxes. And one more issue that dominates the news outlets this morning is the migrant crisis, of course. The Home Secretary is in France today with a meeting of her opposite number, the French Interior Minister, to reach a new agreement on tackling illegal crossings. Well, let's explore more of that very issue now, because, of course, this meeting is taking place later today, and it's expected to reach a deal that would include a 40% increase in the number of officials and officers patrolling beaches in northern France, as well as investment in port security to prevent illegal entry to the United Kingdom. UK officers will work with their French counterparts for the first time, sharing information to understand the threat. There will also be a focus on technology and more investment in removal centres. The Home Secretary has been talking this morning, and this is what she had to say.
There are several elements to the deal, and I think it represents a positive next step to our collaboration with the French. It's not going to fix it overnight, it's not a silver bullet, but I think for the first time we have some real wins for both the French and the UK. First of all, we'll see embedded observers. That means there will be British officers working on French soil observing the work or working on the ground with French officers to detect and intercept the illegal migrants as they attempt to leave France. We'll be working hand in hand in the control rooms, managing intelligence and working with law enforcement bodies. There'll be a 40% uplift in the number of French gendarmes patrolling the French beaches, and there'll be stronger and closer collaboration when it comes to criminal law enforcement, intelligence collaboration and interception upstream, so that the organised immigration criminal gangs can further be disrupted and dismantled.
The Home Secretary speaking earlier there. But of course, all of this comes at a cost. An expected £60 million further every year to be sent to France to manage this all. Is this a deal worth having? And will it make any difference at all? Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP for Workington, Mark Jenkinson. Mark, I know you've been taking part in small boat discussion groups in number 10, talking about this issue. Is this the sort of solution that you wanted to see?
Well, it's definitely part of the solution, Tom. You talk about the cost, £60 million. Well, that's 9 days what we're spending on hotel accommodation in the UK. So working in France to stop some of the boat crossings, and we've seen, that collaboration previously under previous agreements stop nearly as many migrants crossing the channel this year as have actually crossed. So it does work. It is part of the solution. But of course, what we've got to do, Tom, is remove the draw for these economic migrants coming to the UK. They're not fleeing persecution. We know this. We've gone through this a number of times. They're not fleeing persecution. They're economic migrants crossing the channel and abusing our hospitality at a cost currently of £6.8 million per day in hotel accommodation. And we've got to stop that immediately.
I think no one would disagree that the cost on hotels, not just in financial terms, but also to the communities that they are in and the lost economic activity, is immense. However, of course, there are a mix of people coming across on the boat, some economic migrants, some genuine asylum seekers. Why are there no general routes for people to apply to claim asylum to the United Kingdom from outside the United Kingdom? If you want to claim asylum and you're not from Ukraine or from Afghanistan or a similar specific case, the only way to do so is to get here illegally.
So we open up routes wherever there's large conflict, as we've seen in Syria, Afghanistan and other places. We do open up where there are other issues, such as in Hong Kong with the CCP, reintroducing a standard of living that the Hong Kongers aren't used to, and we have a debt to those Hong Kongers. We open up routes for them too. So we, as a country, we've been known and are known to act when we need to. Of course, there are these people cross many safe countries in most circumstances to get here. A lot of them have documentation that they then dispose of en route. We know that people are flying into Belgium, for example, before making the crossing. They have to have documentation to make that flight. And then, of course, by the time they get over the channel, that documentation is gone. The system has been abused, Tom. And that means we have absolutely no political latitude at the moment. So we need migration for growth. We've just been talking to Mark Littlewood there about our growth needs. We're going to need migration in this country to do what we need to do in terms of growing our economy. But we have no political latitude until we get a grip of the illegal migration across the channel.
Just looking at the terms of this deal expected to be signed later today, British observers for the first time will be on those beaches watching the French go about their business trying to stop those small boats. Why did we insist on observers? Do we not think the French are doing their job properly?
I wouldn't like to comment on what the French were. We know that the French have been stopping. They've stopped 1,000 boats this year. I think is the figure, 29,000 potential migrants. So we know that the French are undertaking some work on the beaches, and that does work. Obviously, we want, I'm sure, to be able to see the scale of the problem for ourselves, and it's worthwhile having British observers there to do that. We need to make much more use of technology. I sat in a command centre in Cyprus last year that could watch 20 miles off the coastline on radar and CCTV. We know that we can use drone technology, which I think this agreement increases use of. There's lots of things we can do, but of course it is boots on the ground that will stop these boats getting into the water. But the scale of the problem is such that I'm not convinced. I know that it is not the only answer. It's just part of the problem. We've got to remove the draw.
So just finally, Mark Jenkinson, what further steps would you like the Home Secretary to take on top of these new increased patrols?
Well, we need to make Rwanda work. We need flights to leave to Rwanda. We need people to know that if you come here without good reason, and the Nationality and Borders Act makes it a criminal offence to land on the UK without leave to remain, it means you can be treated as a different priority for asylum if you say things that aren't true, or you've got connections to third countries, for example. Some of these people have made applications in other countries, which gives them that connection. So we need to make much more use of our new powers in the Nationality and Borders Act. We need to implement the modern slavery provisions of the Nationality and Borders Act. We need to stop. If you know that you're going to get 400 days here, which is the average time taken to process a modern slavery claim, then it's worth coming and you can abscond in that 400 days if you don't think that your claim is going to be successful. What we need to do is fix the modern slavery provisions. We need to get flights off the ground to Rwanda, and we need to stop using hotel accommodation and start using large detention centres. You cannot come here illegally. This has to be the message. You cannot come here illegally and access all the things that British people can: free healthcare, schooling, and all the other things that taxpayers like you and I and all of my constituents are paying for, and expect that to last. The message has to be that will not be allowed.
Well, it's a long laundry list to get cracking on with for the Home Office, no doubt building upon the deal, which I'm told was signed at 8 a.m. this morning. So there we go, first step already going there. But Mark Jenkinson, thank you for your thoughts this morning. It's a fascinating conversation and no doubt one we will return to. Well, listening to that interview was our Home and Security editor, Mark White, the third Mark that we've had on the programme this morning. Now, Mark, you're joining us from the Holiday Inn Hotel in Maidenhead. Can you just firstly tell us the significance of this location today?
Well, the fruits of this deal, it's hoped, will reap benefits for the people, of course, of Maidenhead and many other towns across the country, because this particular hotel, yes, the Holiday Inn, as you say, has been taken over and used by asylum seekers, migrants now for the past 6 months. So it means that this particular venue here, like so many others, hundreds of hotels across the country, are not now available for wedding receptions, other functions, for tourists, business people to use in the town. And of course there is the added concern that people have here in Maidenhead and other communities of all these people, mainly young men, mixing about, hanging around with nothing really to do, getting bored, and in some cases getting up to mischief. So there are concerns and some real hopes that perhaps this deal with Suella Braverman will reap rewards. And of course, all the time we know the boats keep coming, and this morning just around 8 a.m. as that deal was being signed in Paris, a small boat landed on a beach in St Margaret's Bay between Dover and Deal. That boat had 10 migrants on board. Our producer down in the area filmed the boat on the beach. He also then saw 10 people who were on the boat running away. 3, he says, have now been apprehended by the authorities, but the other 7, we don't know the location of these people at this time, Tom. On the other side of the channel, of course, we're told that we will now get an enhancement of the security personnel, the police patrolling these beaches. Well, again, GB News was on the ground near Dunkirk on Saturday, and we saw French police clashing with migrants, people trying to get to boats and out to sea being prevented by the French police, and then clashing, as I say, with those officers, throwing sticks and stones towards the police as the police tried to chase them back using CS spray to disperse those people. But there are thousands, Tom, that are still over there. Our producer, who was across in Dunkirk around that area, saw some 6,000 migrants in various camps around the Dunkirk area. And of course, that doesn't then talk to the camps that are also down in Calais. So thousands still trying to get across, and they may be stopped one day, but we know because of the pattern of these events that they'll try again the very next day.
Of coastline and a really remarkable scale of challenge, particularly because today the weather conditions aren't particularly stable. I mean, it's very foggy. It's not warm. I'm not sure whether there's a still sea or otherwise. But the fact that boats are still coming across at this time of year really does emphasise the scale of the issue.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it is actually quite calm out in the Channel today. We've had a weather window because at this time of year it can be pretty unpredictable in terms of winds and waves, and it has really for a couple of weeks been impassable for these small boats. But as of the early hours of Saturday morning, the wind died down, the waves died down, and the boats were able to make it across. That's why we saw 972 come across on Saturday. We're told by our team down on the ground in Kent that at least 400 or 500 came across yesterday, and we're expecting those figures out from the Ministry of Defence, and more coming across today.
Well, it's extraordinarily high numbers. Let's see if this deal does anything.
I'm just told, Tom, 853 came across yesterday. 853 in 26 boats. So another phenomenally busy day yesterday, Tom.
Well, on that note, I'm afraid that's all we have time for the show today. But what an extraordinary set of numbers. Let's see if this deal does anything to quell them. Well, coming up, it's Bev Turner today, so stick around for that. But first, here's the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking foggy in the east, gradually clearing with some rain pushing into the west. Let's take a look at the details. So starting off in the southwest of England, and here it's looking pretty wet this lunchtime. Rain will continue to edge eastwards, but things will turn brighter through the afternoon. Meanwhile, in the southeast, the morning fog should have mostly cleared and some brightness may be breaking out for many, but it will be largely cloudy. Rain will have edged into western parts of Wales, and it will be mostly light and should take a little longer to reach most eastern parts. But meanwhile, across the Midlands, it should be dry this lunchtime, with the rain not set to arrive here until later on, and it'll be mostly cloudy, though perhaps misty for some. It's also looking dry but cloudy around northeastern England. Here it will stay dry through much of the afternoon, though the cloud may be thick enough for a few spots of rain. There may be the odd spot of rain around eastern parts of Scotland. Meanwhile, further west it's looking wetter, although the rain will not be especially heavy. The earlier rain will have cleared from Northern Ireland, so it'll be mostly dry here, and the cloud should break up, meaning some sunny breaks are expected this afternoon. So the rain in the west will edge a little further eastwards this afternoon, and it will be drier and brighter following on from that. And that's how the weather is shaping